Here he is, former executive producer, Hockey Night in Canada, co-host of the Bob McCown podcast, Mr. John Shannon, back with Sekeres Price. How you doing, John?
I'm great, boys. You?
Yeah, fantastic.
Well.
We're off to Penticton in a couple of weeks for the Young Stars
don't
tournament,
even,
so getting back to I know.
That's why I love that tournament. I love that tournament.
Yep.
I really do. I'm so glad that all four teams had the wit and wisdom to bring it back and do something special for that part of the world, particularly now after what's gone on the last month up in the valley.
Oh.
But that I first time I saw Bo Horvat as a Canuck, first time I saw Johnny Gaudreau as a Flame, first time I saw Connor McDavid as an Oiler, all in Penticton, and they were fantastic stories at that time and continue to be great stories in the NHL.
And I was thinking about it. The tournament, Jeff, I think is perhaps most noted for what just John talked about, and particularly McDavid and some of the Oilers' first overalls. And then you look at the guys from Winnipeg who have played through that tournament in this tournament, because they've been such a great draft and develop organization, John, that a lot of their guys who have gone on to be terrific Jets.
And Nick Ehlers would be at the top of my list that I saw in Penticton. Right. I mean, I remember him from his days in Halifax with the Mooseheads, but he was one of those guys that, you always wondered if his size was going to be a factor in the NHL. And that moment he was on the ice in Penticton, you said, nope, this guy is going to be a star. And they made a great draft pick that year in getting Ehlers, and he made his first impact in Penticton. It truly is one of those, if you're a hockey crazed guy and want to go spend a little bit of time in a great part of the world, go to Penticton and watch 3 or 4 days of the tournament and drink some wine and play some golf and have some fun.
And I got to hand it to the Oilers fans in northern Alberta, Jeff. As you well know, there is a lot of blue and orange in Penticton on that weekend. They travel well. And
Alberta thinks it owns the Okanagan, right? I think. That's how that works.
Especially on the August long weekend.
So here's an interesting story. I mean, not to hijack what we were going to talk about, but so when I was running Hockey Night, one of the great jobs that I had was I could decide distribution. I could decide which game went in which parts of the country. And there was this one playoff round that I decided that in British Columbia, that I think there'd be more interest in either Montreal or Toronto than there would be Edmonton. And I got absolutely lambasted after one night with Oiler fans living in Penticton, Kelowna, Vernon, people living in the Fraser Valley saying, we moved from Edmonton. We're Albertans. We want to watch the Oilers. So we changed our distribution for the next game. But I've never forgotten that how many Albertans actually do migrate to British Columbia and then maintain their ties to their favorite hockey clubs.
Yeah. My late father-in-law used to warn us on the August long weekend. He'd say, Matthew, you just be careful when you're out on the water there at Scott. They aren't boat people like we are. Marvelous stuff. Let's move on. Hey, John, Rick Tocchet did a big interview this week with Ian McIntyre of Sportsnet. It hit a lot of topics. Just generally thinking, what do you think the Tocchet effect will be with a full training camp and a full season to coach this club?
Off the top of my head, I would just say that there will be a lot more structure to what the Canucks have a year ago under Bruce. And what Bruce instilled was not what that structure would be, particularly in the defensive zone. It's funny. I ended up talking to a couple of people around the organization when I was in BC a month ago, and I would tell you half the people enjoyed working and playing for Bruce, and they reveled in the freedom that they had on the ice. And I suspect there won't be that freedom on the ice with Rick Tocchet's system than there was under Boudreau. So I guess to me the number one difference that people will find is structure, and particularly structure in the defensive zone.
It's funny because we saw a little bit of it last year when Tocchet came in and brought in Adam Foote and Sergei Gonchar. And I guess it just speaks to the world we live in. But there's been a lot of talk this week about this power play by committee, John, and the fact that Jason King is out as the assistant coach that had the power play in his portfolio. And Tocchet says, he'll have a fair bit of say, but the Sedins obviously know their way around an NHL power play. But the fact that Sergei Gonchar can sort of be a part-time coach, but watch every game wherever he is and still, cut video clips or have somebody cut the clips that he wants and present them to the players. I guess in some work from home and remote work is everywhere, and I guess the NHL as well.
You beat me to it. I think when you think of technology now, I remember, I don't know if you recall, when John Tortorella was the coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets, twice a month he'd bring Marty St. Louis in. And Marty St. Louis was brought in to work on the power play and work on faceoffs and deal with the centers and the offensive side of the game. And then he'd disappear. And it wasn't at a time when you were doing remote clips and having Zoom meetings, but it was at a time when he would be sending in his thoughts. So I think the game has gone that way. I think that when you look at what players look at now and how they get instruction anyway, and they're on their iPad, whether it be on the bench because their tablet. We can't say iPad because that's a brand. The tablet, right? Because the NHL doesn't get any money from the big red apple. So the tablet, and then on the airplane after the game, Jeff. I mean, the first thing all those guys do is they go to the tablet, and somebody's already clipped every shift that they had in the game. And so they get to look at it. So to me, if you want that, the skill that Sergei Gonchar brought, and we all know what a great influence he can be. The moment he left Pittsburgh's bench, Mike Sullivan had an issue with some of the stuff they were trying to do because Sergei didn't have near the influence. So to me, I think it's just a progression of what we're seeing with technology and in day-to-day life. And it's also the downside of Sergei Gonchar wanting to live on the East Coast and be a coach on the West Coast, and there's a big difference, and it's a hard way to travel. And if you don't want to leave your family, then you're not going to be living in Vancouver very often.
Tocchet also talked about leadership group, John. He said the captaincy is still fluid. Two-part question here. Could you see them moving towards 3 A's here with Elias not re-signing, that him, Hughes, Miller all get letters and there is no official captain? And honestly, these days in the National Hockey League, as much as the C may still be important, leadership group seems to be the thing.
Agreed.
Across the league, more so than just a singular
You talk
captain.
To every coach, right, Matt? You talk to every coach in this league, and they talk about leadership groups, 3, 4, 5 guys that they bring in or they deal with on the charter after the game and say, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? I'm a real advocate. I'm not sure they need a captaincy anywhere anymore. Last year there was, I think the season started with 8 teams without a captain. Might have even gone deeper than that. And now that we know that Blake Wheeler's out in Winnipeg, I think that they're going to take their time in Winnipeg creating a captaincy as well. But I think that the way the world works is there's a captain to deal with what the coaching staff and what management wants. And then there's a leadership group amongst the players. I mean, you guys have both been in the room. Heck, in Vancouver, been in the room 10 times more than I have. But you know who's running the ship. You can see it a mile away. And they don't necessarily have to have a captaincy. Hey, in Toronto, for the longest time, one of the most influential players inside the room was Phil Kessel. And Phil Kessel was never the captain. But Phil Kessel had a tremendous amount of influence. And so I think that I think things are morphing to the point where I'm not sure you need a captain. And really the only question becomes a captain is who you're going to give the trophy to when they get to the 3rd and the 4th round, right? And we can solve that problem. That's a great problem to have. Then. Yeah, that's a great problem to have.
That photo lives in history. That's one where you absolutely do want.
But I don't know. You remember? So the 1970 Boston Bruins. The 1970 Boston Bruins did not have a captain. Johnny Busick was given the cup and skated off with it. He wore an A. I've never forgotten that as a kid because they don't have a captain. Who are they going to give it to? And you'd think it would be or you'd think it'd be Esposito, but it wasn't. It was in Boston was Johnny Busick, and he was never he didn't wear that captaincy particularly that year.
Was Orr too young at the time? Like, did
Yeah.
he help me out? Did he eventually grow into it?
No, he never was the captain in Boston.
He never was the captain. Oh, that's
No,
right.
he was never the never the captain in Boston, and I'm not sure Bob would have ever wanted it. He probably wanted to. There are things that give other people attention. I have enough.
Yeah.
You mentioned Phil Kessel. It's interesting now that we have moved into September here. I mean, this is the month of hockey. It's not just Phil Kessel, Zach Parise and Eric Stahl.
Well,
and
Patrick Kane's helping. Patrick Kane's helping.
Patrick, Thomas Tatar. There are a number of guys. Like, are there going to be some signings here before camps, or are some of these guys going to have to go the PTO route?
I suspect they're going to have to. Some of them are going to have to go the PTO route. I mean, it's a hard way to do it. It's probably a blow to the ego for some of those guys for that to happen. But there's still if you're contemplating, a lot of teams contemplating these types of guys. Particularly, Tatar's one of the interesting guys for me. I always he brings something to the table, and hopefully isn't too expensive. But there are teams that if they want to bring them in, they're going to have to. They got to move some dollars. They got to move some money. So I think as we get closer to the middle of the month, Jeff, I think we're going to see teams move dollars, and B, then we're going to see some PTOs, and then go from there. Or if you have enough, if you think you have enough in the tank and you think this guy can help you, you do sign him to a 1-year deal.
You hearing anything on Tyler Myers on that score?
No, I haven't heard a bit, and it's. You almost wonder. I've talked to about 10 or 11 teams in the last week, and most of them tell me that they're settled. They're not doing anything. They're not going to be adding players. Or, for instance, in Edmonton's case, they did their 2 PTOs in Sam Gagner and Brandon Sutter, and that's it. And so they're just going to hold their breath until camp starts and see what happens. But I have not heard a thing on Tyler Myers.
I know you had Bill Armstrong on the pod this week. I haven't had a chance to listen yet, but I look at Arizona, and obviously, I mean, the punchline, a lot of NHL jokes, but Matt Dumbasine's there. They get Sean Dursey, Troy Stetcher's going back there. I mean, that's the right side essentially of their defense. They got Logan Cooley to come out of school, Clayton Keller. I'm just curious, what is the mood from the desert, and is there any chance that team could make a little get some traction this year?
Well, the question has to be: are they going to play meaningful games in February and March? They have 2 goaltenders they really believe in, and if their goaltending can keep up, then I think they're going to be a factor in that Central Division. If you look at where the Central Division is right now, I think you have to put Dallas and Colorado as the 2 elite teams, but the other team's going to vie for that 3rd spot or even a 4th position in the conference. St. Louis, Nashville, and all the stuff that they've done this summer. I think you put Arizona pretty close in that pool of people. And maybe Logan Cooley is the key to it. He was too good to stay at college hockey, just too good. He wasn't going to learn a darn thing on the ice there. So the fact that they got him signed and he could be a factor, I think, is big. I do like Matt Dumba's signing. Bill Armstrong on our show talked about how important it was to get some veteran players to sign that are going to play on these 1-year deals, hungry to play, hungry to prove that they aren't over the hill. And Matt Dumba is certainly at the top of that list.
Yeah, and we talking a little bit on today's show, Jeff, about closing the gap to the playoff teams. We always forget there might be some who are pushing from below the Vancouver Canucks. John, practice facility came up here again this week. Tocchet, it had almost become a punchline here. Rick talking about everybody who has to have a good summer. But he had hoped that the players would centralize here in August. It turns out it's not going to be until next week. But he said, I'm not mad at him because, we don't have a permanent facility to call our own where the players could come and skate and go through all the informalities in a centralized, easy peasy place. How much do you think that's holding back the Canucks right now? The lack of a practice facility.
I think when you can put a rink completely dedicated to what your players want when they want it, I think that's a huge factor. I think it's a huge comfort factor. And it makes it easy for guys to go to work. What are you doing today? I think I'll go to the rink. And you don't have to worry whether they, going to Burnaby Yates or whatever they want to call it now, Canlan. It's different because there's probably a concert at Rogers Arena and you can't get ice there. And I think it's a huge factor. And I think that, when you look at what has gone on, I think that, and it's funny because I think one of the first things when Jimmy showed up was to say, we got to get a practice facility. We have to have one. If you looked at what is in Pittsburgh, I don't know if Jeff, if you've been to Cranberry, but if you have been to the Pittsburgh practice facility, it is out of this world. And there are so many like that around the NHL that are dedicated to your hockey club. And to me, I think that's now a fact of life for every NHL team. And I think it also becomes a factor in selling free agents. How do I work out? What's available to me anytime I want, 24/7, 365. And that's part of what I think drives players to say why I like playing in certain spots. It's something that has to happen. It has to happen in Vancouver, and it should be a key for every team in this league. It's funny, we had Brian Burke on, and one of the things is with his new job with the Women's League, he says one of the biggest aspects that we're dealing with all the players is we need 6 great practice facilities for the Women's League. So if the Women's League can get a practice rink, please, Francesco. How about for your team?
Hey, John, great stuff. Marvelous summer here as well. Enjoy your Labor Day weekend. We will catch up next week.
Thank you, boys. Yeah, I might even go to a football game.
Attaboy. Get to the hammer. Give my best to Brunt. All right. Oski wee wee. Oski wawa. Eat 'em raw.
This clip brought to you by Interchange Recycling. Visit interchangerecycling.com to learn more and to find your closest recycling center.